Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Kehoe, Commissioner Liu, Commissioner Norton, Commissioner Tavoloni, Commissioner Chair Van Kneinenberg,
Here.
Senator Bell, Assemblymember Frazier, Commissioner Gardino, Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Kehoe, Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, let's have the record reflect that I am receiving texts that Commissioner Gardino and Commissioner Inman and Commissioner Kehoe are hearing us. They're having a hard time speaking, and somehow us getting their audio. So we'll continue to work on that issue. Okay.
If we could have Alika give them a call and see if we can start working through.
She is.
Okay, great.
Okay, welcome to our webinar participants. The CTC exists to make transportation planning, funding, and policy more understandable and accountable. Our meetings normally take place in diverse locations around the state so that commissioners can see firsthand the variety of infrastructure issues around California. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 has required us to adjust to a webinar format. The Commission's agenda is located under the Handout tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. It can also be found on the Commission's website. If you are experiencing any technical issues with the GoToWebinar system, please contact the organizer through the Questions tab or via the CTC webinar email address shown on the screen. To our commissioners, please mute your microphone except when you intend to speak to minimize outside noise and feedback. Should commissioners have any questions or comments during the meeting, you have three options. The preferred option is to text Director Weiss. You may also let staff know through the comment tab. You can also send inquiries through the questions tab so that they can be read to the audience on your behalf. I will do my best to call on each of you in turn. Because this meeting is not an in-person meeting, every vote will need to be a roll call vote. A commissioner should only speak when called upon by the chair. When called upon, please state your name and briefly make your point. I would please ask that no one speak a second time on any one motion until everyone who wishes to speak the first time has done so. If you are making a presentation to the commission today, please do your best to be succinct. To the general public, we welcome comments from the public. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer the computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, please select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the commission should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. There are two options for the public to participate in comments on the agenda. First, you can use the Questions tab. You must type the agenda item number that you are commenting upon, and your comment, and the staff will read the comment on your behalf. Alternatively, you may click the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please make sure to state your name and agency prior to voicing your remarks. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Also, please make sure that your comments add new information If you agree with the comments of a previous speaker, simply make that statement. Since we often have many speakers, we ask that you make your point in 3 minutes or less. If for some reason we have many speakers on a topic, I reserve the right to limit comments to 1 minute. At this time, I have the honor of presenting Silver Superior Accomplishment Awards. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, state, regional, and local governmental agencies had to cancel or postpone public meetings and events. On March 25th, the California Transportation Commission held its first ever virtual commission meeting. It took considerable organization to hold this meeting online when we never attempted it before. Doug Remedios, Alika Chenzizi, and Justin Hall, as members of the webinar team, provided valuable assistance in successfully organizing our March Commission meeting. Their actions allowed the Commission to continue its critical functions, programming and allocating much-needed transportation funds to many state and local transportation projects. The team demonstrated superior performance in their successful execution of the March Commission meeting. The Commissioners want to express our sincere gratitude to these 3 Commission staff members and all of the staff for their continued efforts to ensure the ongoing allocation of transportation funding during these critical times. To recognize the wonderful work of Doug, Alika, and Justin, each will receive a Silver Superior Accomplishment Group Award in the amount of $250. I thank you for your work on behalf of the Commission. At this time, I'd like to turn to item 2 on our agenda. Director Weiss, for your report.
Good morning. I'd like to update the Commission on 2 new hires. So Matthew Yazgat has been appointed as an Associate Deputy Director in the programming area. You may remember Matthew from his previous tenure at the CTC working on Cycle 1 of the Local Partnership and Solution for Congested Corridors program. He will now oversee the accountability and transparency guidelines and program reporting efforts. Matthew has a Master's of Public Policy from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and a bachelor's degree from Sacramento State University. I'd also like to announce that Tanisha Taylor has been appointed Chief Deputy Director effective May 1st. For the last 4 years, Tanisha served as the Director of Sustainability for CalCog and as a policy advisor to the state's regional transportation planning agencies. Prior to her tenure at CalCog, Tanisha worked for 11 years at the San Joaquin Council of Governments. She is a graduate of Alabama Agricultural and Mechanical University. That concludes my report.
Thank you. All right, at this time, I'd like to call on Secretary David Kim to make a report. Secretary Kim. I am not hearing the Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, and Commission staff. It is good to be with you in the midst of these challenging circumstances. The last time I addressed you, the world was in a much different place, and I hope all of you are well and staying safe and healthy as we collectively navigate our way through these very uncertain times. I want to, first of all, right before I start, I want to congratulate Doug, Alika, and Justin for the well-deserved award. This new format that we're all trying to learn and adjust to is sometimes challenging, but we're making the best of it. So congrats to the Commission staff. I want to touch upon 3 quick issues this morning. The state's response to COVID-19, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, and the Lausanne Corridor Working Group. On the pandemic, it is all hands on deck for everybody in the governor's cabinet and our respective teams. It's been a pretty intense time. We brief the governor every day, and as you know, the governor has a news conference every day at noon. It's called Newsom at noon, and I hope you're able to tune in on Twitter or Facebook Live whenever he does these briefings, which is pretty much every day of the week, except for Sunday. A couple things on the state's response. A number of task forces have been stood up by the State Operations Center, which is part of Cal OES, Office of Emergency Services. I chair the largest task force. It's the Transportation and Critical Infrastructure Task Force. This is made up of about a dozen state and federal departments and agencies throughout the administration. Our purpose is to identify and address critical supply chain issues. We also get into freight and goods movement issues across all sectors, not just transportation, but getting into the transport of food and agricultural products, and of course, critical supplies like personal protective equipment. So it's been pretty intense. Besides the task force, we have been doing a lot of outreach to many of the transportation stakeholders that we all know. California Transit Association, California Trucking Association, California Association of Port Authorities, California Airports Council, and many, many others. And it's a chance for us to hear from them firsthand on what's happening on the ground and to address any issues and challenges that they may have. And so along those lines, Caltrans has taken a number of actions, and without getting into them now, I'll defer to Director Omashaka when he gives his report. But Caltrans has been very actively involved in taking a number of actions to address the pandemic. Also, I want to quickly raise that we are engaging in a partnership with the City of Sacramento, Sacramento RT, and others to take unused transit buses and use them to put up Wi-Fi super hotspots in communities with limited high-speed access. The governor announced this last week, and so we're going to continue to work hard and provide leadership during this emergency, both when it comes to broadband and other issues. A quick note on the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, TIRCP. As you know, we announced those grants last week, $500 million worth of grants to 17 grant recipients up and down the state. I think this is a critically important move to spur economic activity. It's going to be part of our overall economic recovery to keep projects moving, to create jobs, and to bolster transit. The way I see it, with unemployment reaching record highs, transit has been and will continue to be a critical lifeline. And so everything we can do to expand the availability and quality of transit, that's what TIRCP is all about. And so we were thrilled to be able to announce those grant awards last week. Finally, quick update on the Low-Sand Corridor Working Group to stabilize the Del Mar Bluffs. As you know, this is a critically important effort in San Diego of importance to Commissioner Kehoe. Back in February, which seemed like a long time ago, at the end of February, I traveled to Washington with Chairman Van Konynenberg, Director Omashaka, as well as Mitch and Paul on the commission staff to discuss our efforts on Del Mar Bluffs. We met with a lot of members of Congress, including the House T&I Chairman Peter DeFazio. We also met with Senator Kamala Harris and many others. And in these meetings, we emphasized that the Low-Sand Corridor was the national poster child for highlighting climate resilience issues and the effect of sea level rise and coastal erosion on our transportation system. And so last Thursday, we convened our second working group meeting by video conference. We were honored to be joined by Congressman Mike Levin and Assembly Member Tasha Borner-Horvath. Also, we talked about how the state came up, awarded a $5 million TIRCP grant for Del Mar Bluffs Phase 5, which is the near-term effort to strengthen the bluffs. We heard briefings from the Resources Agency and the Corps of Engineers as well. So a lot of good progress is being made on the Del Mar Bluffs to identify and solidify a strategy for both short-term and near-term solutions on the Del Mar Bluffs, and that effort will continue throughout the year. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report, and thank you for your time, attention, and again, I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
Secretary Kim. Okay, at this time, we'll move to tab 4. And Matthew, will you please lead us on this item?
Item through one-time schedule amendment for the local streets and roads program, specifically for 2020 funding eligibility and corresponding 2019 expenditure reporting. As a result of the governor's executive order N3320, which placed into effect an order requiring all individuals in the state of California to stay at home or at their place of residence due to the state of emergency resulting from COVID-19, agencies began to inform the commission that their city councils and county boards were suspending their meetings, making it increasingly difficult to submit their adopted project lists by the commission's May 1st due date in order to meet the fiscal year 2021 funding eligibility. On April 9th, 2020, CTC staff held 2 public virtual workshops with over 900 participants to gather stakeholder input regarding the fiscal year funding eligibility schedule. Based on stakeholder engagement, CTC staff concluded that it would be prudent to extend the eligibility due date to July 15th, 2020. This extension would subsequently push back other local streets and roads deadlines as outlined in this item without impacting the fiscal year apportionment amounts dispersed to cities and counties. The commission has also received feedback regarding agencies' potential inability to meet the program's maintenance of effort requirements outlined in State Highway Code Section 2036. While the commission does not have discretion to waive or suspend these requirements, it is important to note that any shortfalls in meeting these requirements can be corrected in the subsequent fiscal year without experiencing reductions in an agency's apportionment. Given the current state of emergency and its potential economic impacts over multiple years, the commission will continue to monitor the maintenance of effort requirement and engage with stakeholders to see if a consensus position can be reached. I would like to sincerely thank the local streets and roads program manager, Alicia Sequeira Smith, who was unable to present this item today. Without her and her team's hard work and extensive outreach to all of our stakeholders, this item would not have resulted in a uniform consensus. So based on stakeholder recommendations and in compliance with program guidelines, staff recommends your approval of tab 4 as presented in the staff recommendation.
Thank you, Matthew. I'll now entertain a motion. Thank you. Thank you. So let the record show that Commissioner Norton made the motion, and there was a second by Commissioner Burke. Is there any public comment on this item? At this time, there is no public comment on this item. Is there commission comment on this item? Commissioner Liu.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I did have a question about the maintenance of effort requirement requests that we've gotten from people. And I did hear that there was going to be an effort to try to develop a consensus on how to proceed. I'd like staff to explain our discretion or lack of discretion when it comes to maintenance of effort, and also any recommendations that they have with regard to how the staff or the agency or the department can proceed in addressing these concerns.
Matthew, could you address Commissioner Liu's question, please?
Certainly. So Commissioner, currently the maintenance of effort requirement is in statute, so it's not a commission policy. However, we have gathered significant feedback from cities and counties in the 2 workshops we had, and the prevailing thought that we're receiving, and we can produce this for you, Commissioner, is that cities are overwhelmingly requesting that the maintenance of effort requirement be suspended or waived at least until the state of emergency is over. And in regards to your comment about what type of outreach are we performing, we actually have a meeting scheduled with the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, Transportation California, and Alliance for Jobs. And we will be discussing with the 4 of those groups kind of alternating ideas for how the commission can have a position or a stance on how to inform the administration on a potential remedy for the existing maintenance of effort requirement.
Thank you.
At this time, are there any other comments from the public? Okay, Mitch, with that, Doug, please call the roll.
Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes.
Commissioner Burke.
Aye.
Commissioner Dunn.
Aye.
Commissioner Gardino. Commissioner Inman.
Yes.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Norton.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Van Kneidenberg.
Aye.
Chair, the item is approved.
Item 5, Hannah Walter. Go ahead, Hannah.
Good morning. Sorry about that. Okay, so in response to the COVID-19 related delays, commission staff proposes to delay application submission deadlines for 3 SB1 competitive programs, including the Local Partnership Competitive Program, the Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. Staff held a workshop on April 8th to discuss the needs of applicants and took into account feedback received at the workshop and through emails and letters. Staff sought to come up with a balanced approach that took into account the differing needs of our partners, the need to keep the economy thriving, and the time needed to review the applications. With this in mind, staff proposes the following revisions to application deadlines. Excuse me, delay the Solutions for Congested Corridors application deadline from June 30th to July 17th, providing 25 weeks or about 6 months to work on applications. Delay the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program deadline from July 15th to August 3rd, providing 18 and a half weeks or a little over 4 months to work on applications. And for the Local Partnership Competitive Program, there's a noted change to the deadline in the book item. After further consideration, staff proposes to revise the application deadline from June 12th to June 30th, providing 14 weeks or a little over 3.5 months to work on applications. Staff proposes that the staff recommendation date of November 12th stay the same and that the program adoption date of December 2nd stay the same. So we're just pushing back the application deadlines, but we're not moving the program adoption date out. Staff recommends approval of these proposed changes, taking note of the Local Partnership Competitive Program change from the book item.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll now entertain a motion.
I move the item. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Commissioner Tavaloni, I approve
And
staff
done
recommendation.
seconds.
We have a motion by Tavaloni and a second by Dunn. Discussion. Is there any public comment on this item?
Yes, we do have public comment.
Okay, at this time, please open the microphone for the public comment or read the public comment.
So this was a comment that was written in from Kenneth Cow from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. Would like to thank the commission and commission staff for considering additional time for competitive programs administered by the CTC. Additional time recognizes the extraordinary circumstances we are currently in and the difficult position all government entities are in. The Bay Area looks forward to nominating critical transportation projects for these competitive programs, putting these dollars to work and delivering significant transportation benefits to the public as soon as possible. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment?
There is no additional comment this time.
Okay. Is there any commissioners who wish to speak on this matter?
I would, Chairman. This is Commissioner Norton.
Go ahead.
I want to thank the CTC staff for listening to the testimony from so many agencies extend the deadline, and especially to thank you for extending the local partnerships deadline to June 30th in this new report. Thank you for amending that deadline, as it was very important to so many agencies who've been contacting us and contacting you about the need for additional time due to challenges of COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, Doug, please call the roll.
Commissioner Alvarado,
Yes.
Commissioner Burke,
Aye.
Commissioner Dunn,
Aye.
Commissioner Guardino, Commissioner Inman,
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe,
Aye.
Commissioner Liu,
Aye.
Commissioner Norton,
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair Van Kneidenberg.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni. Chair of the item pass.
Okay, so we are having a technical issue with Commissioner Guardino. He is texting that he approved item 4 and texted that he approves item 5, but for some reason we are not getting his audio. So let's somehow have the minutes reflect that, please. Thank you. All right, item 6, Lori?
Good morning, Commissioners. This is an action item to consider amending the 2021 Active Transportation Program schedule. At the March 25th, 2020 Commission meeting, the Commission adopted the 2021 Active Transportation Program guidelines. The guidelines include the program schedule. The adopted schedule called for project applications to be due on June 15th, 2020. However, because stakeholders had started expressing concern about their ability to meet this deadline during the Governor's Executive Order N3320, the stay-at-home order, staff committed to reevaluating the program schedule and bringing forward an amended schedule for Commission approval if necessary. After more discussion with stakeholders, including a virtual workshop on April 8th, 2020, staff determined that delaying most aspects of the 2021 ATP by approximately 3 months would be the best course of action. The ATP would benefit from a longer delay than the other competitive programs for the following reasons. Many ATP applicants are small agencies that don't have the ability to develop a quality application when they're working away from the office. ATP applicants should be consulting with public health agencies when developing their projects and project applications. However, at this time, public health agency resources are focused on the COVID-19 crisis. And the ATP puts a strong emphasis on effective and current public engagement. While most applicants have already been engaging on their projects, they cannot conduct any final pre-application engagement activities at this time. Finally, many ATP projects are safe routes to school projects that require close coordination with school district staff during application development. However, most school district staff have been redirected to implementing distance learning and cannot participate in project planning at this time. Because of the volume of ATP applications received and the extensive evaluation process, pushing the application deadline back approximately 3 months requires that the rest of the schedule, including staff recommendation posting and program adoption, also be delayed by approximately 3 months. The proposed revised schedule, however, will significantly reduce the time period between when the 10 large MPOs submit their draft program recommendations and final program recommendations to Commission staff. Commission staff conducted a virtual meeting with ATP staff from the 10 large MPOs on April 13th to discuss the reasonableness of the proposed revised schedule and their MPO programs. The MPO staff agreed that they can meet the new schedule, including the reduced time between MPO draft and final recommendations. There is one project type exception to the approximately 3 months schedule delay being proposed. Staff is recommending only a 1 month delay for quick build pilot project applications. The project application for these projects is very streamlined and much less data intensive. Also, these projects are often addressing immediate safety concerns and need to be implemented as quickly as possible. Commission staff and the stakeholders believe that a 1-month delay will give these applicants sufficient time to submit. These projects can then be programmed at the December meeting, giving successful applicants an opportunity to advance, allocate, and start their projects right away. The proposed revised program schedule with all the relevant milestones can be found in the book item. Staff would also like to note that because the first year of programming for the 2021 ATP is fiscal year 21-22, as long as the program is adopted by June 2021, projects will not be losing any project delivery time. Also, the Commission will still be meeting the statutory requirement of programming a new program of projects by July of every odd year. Staff recommends the Commission approve an amendment to the 2021 Active Transportation Program schedule as proposed in this book item, and I can take any questions or comments at this time.
All right. Is there any questions from the public on this item?
There's no public question or comment at this time.
Okay. I will entertain a motion.
This is Commissioner Alvarado. I'd like to make a motion to accept staff recommendation.
Second by Commissioner Inman.
I have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Inman. Any commissioner comments on this item? Seeing none, Doug, please call the roll.
Commissioner Alvarado.
Yes.
Commissioner Burke.
Aye.
Commissioner Dunn.
Aye.
Commissioner Gardino.
Aye.
Commissioner Inman.
Aye.
Commissioner Kehoe.
Aye.
Commissioner Liu.
Aye.
Commissioner Norton.
Aye.
Commissioner Tavaloni.
Aye.
Chair Van Kenenberg.
Aye.
Chair, the item is approved.
Thank you. I now call on Vincent Mamano to give us a federal update on the COVID-19 impacts.
Morning, everyone. I hope everybody is safe and well. Mr. Chair, I'm sure you kind of like the ability to mute and unmute, so I'm glad you unmuted me. Thank you for that. It's very kind of you. I'm glad. I can't wait till we get back in person where you don't have that ability.
Well, yeah.
You're right. A couple things. Federal Highways working. My office is, almost everyone from my office is working remotely, but hopefully that should be seamless to everybody, all of our partners out there. And a good example of that is we did a remote certification review of the Tulare County Association of Governments. So I want to thank Ted Smalley with that team and Caltrans and FTA staff in my office for the effort that went into that. First one, I think, in the state that we've done remotely. So everything is continuing to move forward. So any opportunity where we can do something like that, we're going to. A couple things I want to point you to. There's a federal highway, on our federal highway website, there's a COVID tab on that, so you can get some information there. And also on the USDOT website, it has the COVID, USDOT website has the COVID direction and guidance and things like that for all the federal all the federal agencies under the Department of Transportation. But I just want to kind of highlight a couple things that that kind of hit Federal Highway in this. One of them is in coordination with Federal Highway, Congress included a legislative clarification regarding special permits during periods of national emergency. This provision helps to ensure the continued free flow and critical relief supplies and other essential goods when responding to the recovery efforts of the emergencies like the current pandemic. It also provides important clarification to the states on their authority to issue permits for overweight vehicles and loads on the interstates during the presidential declared emergency. Another thing you'll see probably as you're driving the roads, under the presidential declared emergency, we reminded the states of their their authority to use changeable message signs concerning the COVID. So the states being very creative with that. I think they're doing a great job. couple other things, we're working with AASHTO very closely and trying to keep encouraging that the maintaining and operating of rest areas continues. One of the other things that came out just shortly after was the FHWA issued a notice of enforcement discretion, allowing the states to permit the use of food trucks in rest areas for to serve commercial truck drivers. So those are a few different things. Now, some of these things we're allowing the state to use their discretion. So it's up to the state on the food trucks, not the Fed. We're not going to tell them to do it. We're telling them they're allowed to do it. So anyway, that's all I have. I just want to encourage people to continue to look at the Federal Highways COVID information and resources location on this page, and same for the United States Department of Transportation's webpage. They have a page for that also, and that includes MARAD and Federal Transit Administration and Federal Railroad Administration and all the administrations under the Department of Transportation. So that's all I have. If anybody has any things we need to be working on, please contact me. We are working.
Thank you, Vince. Are there any questions for Vince?
No questions.
Okay, we see none. We'll now move to item 9. Teresa McMillan. Teresa McMillan will now give us an update on the urban agencies. Can we unmute Teresa, please?
Mr. Chair, Mr. 8 was not done, if you knew.
Yeah, 8, he's not available till 10:30, so we're going to skip 8 and do that. No problem.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, commissioners. My name is Teresa McMillan. I'm the Executive Director of the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the San Francisco Bay Area, as well as the Association of Bay Area Governments, the land use and housing agency there. I'm privileged to have this opportunity to speak, as I was invited to, on what's been happening with our agency in the urban environment. I don't pretend to speak for all of my other urban area regional colleagues, although we have been meeting on an ongoing basis to share best practices, experiences, and work with all of our partners in moving forward. I also want to thank the CTC staff, reflecting the comments of my colleague Kenneth Cow earlier, that your partnership and continued flexibility to work with us is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to continuing to address this crisis and all of its challenges. So with respect to the Bay Area, we are now in our 7th week of shelter in place, and very quickly sort of reflecting on internal things that the agency needed to do, we had pivoted very quickly to a required remote environment, both for our staff and our boards, beginning on March 16th. Importantly, we opened our Emergency Operations Center within days for centralized reporting of transport system status. That was up and running even before the governor's statewide shelter-in-place order became a critical way of seeing how our transportation system was reacting to literally daily changes, and became a great point of coordination among many transportation partners across the region. Externally, there's been so much that's been happening. I want to highlight for you a couple that stand out in particular. With respect to our bridges, on Friday, March 20th at midnight, the commission, in its statutory role as the Bay Area Toll Authority, in close coordination with Caltrans, temporarily suspended cash collection on all 7 state-owned bridges in the region. This was done in response to the governor's decision to remove staff from those 7 toll plazas to minimize toll takers and toll paying customers' exposure to COVID-19 during this public health crisis. The resultant temporary all-electric tolling is working smoothly, aided by greatly reduced traffic volumes across the bridges. Bridge traffic fell by over 50% on the weekdays and over 65% on weekends since the shelter-in-place orders were put in place. We're beginning to slowly see upticks in that traffic, but we expect it to be depressed for some time. Traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge is down nearer 70%. And so, again, we are working closely with our partners there. On April 22nd, BATA took action to suspend congestion pricing on the Bay Bridge with a to-be-determined date for reconsideration for congestion pricing after we've had further study, given the opportunity to take a reflective look at that policy. I want to thank Caltrans District Director Tony Tavares and his team, who worked extremely closely with us hand in glove on making these key adjustments. Transit recovery is the other thing I would like to highlight for you, again, as an example of the types of challenges and responses that our region is taking, but is reflected, I think, across the state in many respects. The MTC team led an intensive effort to distribute the critical federal CARE Act funding that was made available as emergency transit assistance to transit operators across the country. That was a $25 billion provision in the CARE Act. Our region received $1.3 billion. The work we've been doing has represented an extraordinary consensus among over 24 transit partners as we try to figure out how to distribute this funding quickly and in the most responsible fashion to the needs we're seeing. Last week, on April 22nd, the Commission approved the allocation of just over $780 million of the $1.3 billion to our transit agencies. We decided to do this in 2 tranches, largely to get immediate assistance out very quickly, but recognizing that needs will shift fairly significantly as the transit agencies have to face a recovery phase. That recovery phase will be looking at cost revenue loss reconciliation among various revenue sources that are greatly impacted, and an overall recovery strategy development, noting that transit ridership has fallen 70 to over 90% across the region. The Commission at that time directed staff to provide an inventory of safety efforts to protect the health of operators and transit riders. That is a growing concern, I'm sure, that is being reflected in other parts of the state. As well, they've set up a blue ribbon recovery task force to deal, as I mentioned, with the major issues that will be facing the transit operators as they look at the dramatically different operating environment post-COVID-19, how our most vulnerable public transit riders who have no other options to travel need to receive some priority consideration in restructuring services and putting them back in place, and how we're going to juggle achieving environmental goals, the yet to be reshaped restoration of public transit, among other things. We'll have to work in how telecommuting and other adjustments that we're seeing our public live with now for almost 2 months will impact the picture of our future. Let me end, though, with also what I'm calling the long game, and how all of these efforts in transportation cannot be done in a silo and have to be evaluated within the longer term planning that many of us in our roles right now are having to pivot and adjust continually given the circumstances we're seeing in trying to estimate what a new normal is going to look like. MTC and ABAG cannot address all of the issues that are going to be evident in a post-crisis future, but I will offer just for you for contemplation for broad areas that our agencies are going to be addressing, and I believe yours will as well. The first is how we travel. Our transportation system is experiencing seismic shifts in usage, transit system, bridges, highways, roadways, how they rebound, how people use them, how do they pay for their usage, all is going to be at an unprecedented scale of change. Where we live, housing availability and affordability were regional crises, certainly in the Bay Area, before the pandemic. And how will those manifest within an economy shaken by unemployment that increases the pressure on those least able to be or remain housed? On the flip side, perhaps the depressed economy will wrangle construction costs down to a manageable level that will allow housing production to gain some footing and accelerate. We know this is a key concern of the governor, and we are just looking forward to a very different normal there. How we contribute, how will job sectors react in the face of national, state, and local market forces subject to federal, state, and local interventions that are still unfolding? Will jobs return to the same level? Critically, will they be in the same locations within the Bay Area, possibly impacting jobs, housing relationships in a fundamental way that will then impact our transit systems that link those jobs and housing? And then finally, it's the foundational question of who we are. The public health crisis at its core attacks people, and everything redounds from that fact. And we are realizing that this crisis impacts segments of our community far more deeply than others. Simply said, those vulnerable before are even more so in the face of COVID-19. Inequities, economic, racial, societal, are being highlighted and undeniably exacerbated under the thumb of the virus. And if people were not on equal footing before and are dragged down even further as the crisis continues to unfold, it only stands to reason that efforts to recover from the crisis will be similarly disparate, absent early and intentional actions to own those disparities and redress them in the climb upward, which could be a singular opportunity for all of us working as a California community. So, Mr. Chair, there's much more that I can report. I will submit a longer summary of what's happening in the Bay Area to your staff to share with the commissioners. But I thank you again for this opportunity to give you a window into what's happening in the Bay Area.
Thank you, Therese. Are there any questions for Therese? This is an informational item, but are there any questions for Therese?
There's no questions at this time.
Okay, seeing none, thank you very much for your perspective. At this time, we'll move back to tab 8, and Director Omashakin has a presentation on what's going on Caltrans and how they are dealing with the COVID-19 impacts. Director Omashakin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me clearly?
I can.
Very good. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and good morning, commissioners and staff. I want to start off in particular by thanking and commending the commission, its members and staff for still finding a way, Director Weiss, still finding a way to move forward with a meeting like this, despite the challenges that we're all facing. So kudos to you and the team there for, again, pulling together this body to have another meeting like this. So, despite the challenges that we are we are all facing. I think it is good to know that our work has been deemed essential. If you could start with the first slide, please. That our work, thank you, that our work has been deemed essential by not only the federal government, but Governor Newsom here has said that the transportation work that we are all focused on, that we're all working on, is critical. And the way that we have looked at it from the Caltrans perspective, it's really in twofold. Number one, internally, our responsibility to our staff, to our employees within the department, and number two, our responsibility to the moving public, whether it be freight or people who are using our transportation system across the state. So some of the things that I'll cover quickly in this presentation, and I have about a dozen slides here, but if you just bear with me, I'll try to get through these as quickly as I can. But, you know, field work, our ongoing field work, some of the construction activities that continue to move forward, how we've addressed teleworking, the work schedule changes across the department, and how we have implemented safety measures like social distancing throughout the department. Next slide. So I want to give a big thank you and a shout out to our maintenance staff, because they always have a heavy load to lift, but they have continued to lift that heavy load throughout this pandemic, throughout this crisis. As many of you know, our maintenance crews are on call 24/7, and they continue to ensure that the system remains fluid, and that essential goods and supplies such as medical needs and groceries that we need more than ever during a time like this continue to get to the places that they need to get to. Essential activities that our maintenance crews continue to perform are emergency traffic control for vehicle crashes, working on things like pothole repairs, pavement markings, installing safety devices, emergency repair of traffic signals and lighting, and cleaning and repair of drainage facilities, and snow removal and emergency convoys. An example of this recently is when we had a pretty significant heavy snow in the Sierras. Some of the freight that was trying to get over the pass got stuck, and our District 3 leadership, our district director, Amajit, worked with CHP and worked with others to get a convoy to escort some of the freight over the pass to get them the supplies into the state so they can get to places that they were needed. So again, the maintenance activities across the state, despite the challenging times, have continued to move forward. Next slide. And so one of the major decisions we had to make throughout the crisis has been, how do we and should we continue to move forward with construction activities? There were some states, in particular Pennsylvania and Washington, who completely grounded to a halt their construction activities as the crisis continued to get worse. And there was some discussion in this region as well of the country about possibly doing this. But the administration, the governor, and many others, including the industry and us, and felt like we could continue to move forward. But if we were going to move forward, we needed to somehow prioritize safety. So we, in close coordination with construction industry partners, we moved forward with a majority of the work that is going on across the state. We have more than 740 construction projects that are happening across the state. Roughly 4% of those projects were either delayed or postponed due to the pandemic. So a majority of the work still moved forward. And as a matter of fact, At some point during the crisis, we decided that we probably should take advantage of the lower traffic volumes that we are experiencing now and speed up the timeline of some projects or expand the work windows of some projects. And so we were able to do that. Two examples, two projects that we were able to actually move up the schedule a little bit. I-5 down in Los Angeles, a project where we're working on HOV lanes down there, and the US 101 bridge deck replacement in San Francisco. I got a chance to go out and see that project firsthand yesterday, and it's a 24-hour operation where the entire construction crew and Caltrans staff are on the ball, moving this huge project forward that has more than 240,000 vehicles traveling across it every day. But the timeline has been moved up from July to right now in April, and the project's going very well and should be open at some point this weekend. And we also were able to expand the work windows for another 116 projects across the state. And when I say expand the work windows, instead of doing some of the work only at night, we now have work windows that include construction activities during the day, where our construction crews and Caltrans team are working during the day when traffic is low. But we've said social distancing, face coverings and mask are absolutely mandatory during these construction activities. And some have even taken measures, like when I was on the construction site yesterday, before I could get on the site, they required that I do a temperature check to make sure that I did not have a fever. And kudos to the construction industry for moving forward and implementing safety requirements and measures such as that. Next slide. So internally, the telework transformation that we've had to make has been a heavy lift. But again, our team here has been very adaptable, very flexible in making sure that we get to the stage. From an infrequent telecommuting agency, we've gone to almost fully an agency that has the capability of doing just that. We now have 85 to 90% of our 13,100 Caltrans office personnel that are staying away from the office and not coming in. This is a significant jump for us from having roughly 5% of our staff teleworking to 85 to 90% of the staff that can telework now teleworking. And this almost happening on the flip of a switch within a span of a few days, we were able to make this adjustment. And we're now in that place today. We've been working with CalHR to ensure that we're providing accurate and timely guidance to all our staff, and developed a task force in late February to actively address real-time administrative issues and develop responses. I want to thank our executive board team, Jim Davis and others, our district directors, and some of our deputy directors who have stepped up and put us in a place where we could be very responsive on these issues as we meet. We've met on a daily basis since the beginning of the crisis. But to make the transition that we made, one of the things that we needed to do was no doubt make some adjustments from a technology standpoint. Next slide. Okay, yeah, this is it. We're in the rest here. Increases in hardware and software infrastructure were needed. Adding telework capacity, scaling up to scale up telework. We more than doubled our VPN capacity from roughly 3,500 people with access to more than 7,500 people. And we added things like remote desktop access, where people can log in from their private computers at home and log into the system here at Caltrans and do it in a safe manner that will not jeopardize the state network. We also deployed things like WebEx meetings, like the CTC is using here today, where we can do PowerPoint presentations and have meetings from a virtual place. So a lot of thanks to our IT staff, George Akiyama, his team, for helping us get to this place. Next slide. But we've also had to keep the state supplied, as I mentioned earlier, and the importance of freight during a time like this. We, due to some federal requirements that were changed, we also instituted measures here from Caltrans and working with the governor's office to allow overweight trucks on our system. Now, we allowed a 10% increase in weight and tonnage weight of trucks on our system. That's something that is now not permissible. If a trucker wants to apply for a permit, they can access that permit on our website now. We also did things like allow food trucks to work in our rest areas, something that was not, again, permissible before, but federal highways opened up an avenue for states to do this. We took advantage of it, and several applications, permits have been sought here. And this is now something that is moving forward in California for the people providing the essential goods and medical supplies that we need across the state. They need to be able to stop and get food items whenever they need to, because they can't pull a truck or an 18-wheeler through a drive-through or whatever. They need to be able to have access to food whenever they need to. And these rest areas, I think, is a great example of our flexibility in allowing the trucking industry to have this access. Next slide. Helping others. This is just something that we as a department, we're committed to and known for doing. We're a part of the activities that take place at the SOC, the State Operations Center. We are very often involved in mission tasking, where we're helping other state partners to make sure that things are in place, or that things we're being as safe as possible. An example of that is over the past several weekends, as the weather continues to warm up, people are getting a little tired of being sheltered in place, and they've wanted to get to places like parks and beaches. And we've helped put up signs and help put up things like K-Rail to make sure that those state facilities stay in a locked mode to not allow people access there to congregate and create unsafe conditions. We've also done things like help transport trailers for the unsheltered. One of the crisis that could definitely explode in the middle of all of this crisis that we're already going through is the unsheltered situation that we have in this state, and the administration and we have as well stepped up to this particular issue very early and said we need to make sure that the homeless, the unsheltered are very much taken care of, so that this does not become something that exacerbates the problem that the crisis that we already have. Public service announcements, the communications efforts using our CMS signs have also been a critical part of our response across the state. Next slide. So we have seen decreased travel across the state. In many cases, and on most of our system, up to 35%, up to a 35% decrease on our state facilities. But one thing that's also been a problem for us, and I want to hone in on this point very specifically and shed a lot of light on this is the safety concern that we also have. Our partners at the CHP identified an 87% increase in the number of tickets that they issued for people going 100 miles an hour and over on our transportation system. That is something that is absolutely not tolerable. Not only is it illegal, but it's dangerous, and it's not only dangerous for the person or people doing it, but it's endangering the rest of the moving public as well, and vulnerable users of the system as well. So this is an issue that I want to hammer home and highlight the fact that even though we've seen a 35% decrease in traffic out there, there are people, as you can see from this particular slide, there are people who unfortunately have taken advantage of that decreased traffic and are endangering the lives of others, and we don't need to allow that to continue to happen. Thank you to OTS and our partners at the CHP who have been part of this effort to get the word out about this and decrease this safety danger that increased over the period of the pandemic and crisis. Next slide. I'll just spend just a little bit of brief time here, but we continue to have workload challenges as it relates to the transition to telework. Some access, even though we've made this big jump with getting additional equipment and additional access, some access is still not in place for all systems. We have cybersecurity challenges that we need to keep in mind as people plug into a virtual system. There's a lot of in-person training that we've had to postpone, and there are certain types of maintenance and construction work that has had to be postponed as well. And I think everybody listening is aware of the challenge that we've had, not only nationally but here in the state, as it relates to essential PPE items like sanitizer and mask. And things like that. The supplies are limited. And when you place an order, sometimes you're backlogged for weeks and not even, if not even months, before some of that supply can get to us in the department. And I skipped over, didn't mention the fact that because some of the courts are closed, that has a lot of potential impact on delaying our projects from moving forward, as we often sometimes need decisions from those entities to move projects forward. Next slide. Construction impacts. I've talked about this a little bit already, but availability of the contract workforce due to COVID-19 illness, shelter-in-place orders, and concerns for personal health and safety remain. Maintaining social distancing for certain work activities can result in efficient workarounds. Contractor material deliveries may see impacts due to workforce shortages as some people stay away, and challenges may result in delays to some projects. Next slide. One of the industries that has taken the biggest hit from this pandemic, I think what we automatically think of sometimes probably is the aviation industry and the fact that people are not flying. But no doubt one of the absolute biggest hits to our transportation sector has been the rail industry, the inner city rail in particular, and we know transit as well. But the graphics you see to the right of your screen there show what has happened to inner city rail. I want to just draw your attention to this, even though you can barely see it, but draw your attention to, for example, the very first image at the top right corner. That image is of the Capitol Corridor over the last 30 days, and comparing 2020 to 2019. The line that you see at the very bottom, that green line, is what ridership looks like today on the Capitol Corridor. the Capital Corridor trips or volume has been down 95%. Whereas the squiggly line right above it is where volume was before. So the industry has taken an absolute hit, and we know how important transit is to mobility across the state, not just for people who are choice riders, but essential workers who need this additional ability to be able to get to work. And so we're going to have an all hands on deck approach to reviving this industry as time wanes. The federal government has provided a bit of a slight boost to the state with the CARES Act, and California is getting $2.5 billion out of the stimulus that's been provided already to sort of boost, or not necessarily boost, but to just generally support the transit industry. I want to give a major thank you to the DRMT, Division of Rail and Mass Transit here, as they've really been working with our local transit partners across the state to pull together information like what you see here. They've led the way in pulling this data together, pulling this information together to help support our transit partners across the state. So thank you to the DRMT team. So one more slide here, and I will close. The biggest part of this all for us, I think we all know, that is pending. We don't know what it looks like yet, is the financial impact of this pandemic. I think we're all sort of figuring out a way to work through the challenge by coming to work, and we know it takes an emotional toll on us as well as we sort of wade through this challenge. But the financial part of this, we know it's going to be a heavy hit, and we haven't fully figured out what that hit's going to look like yet. We know the transportation revenue, however, our revenue is based on fuel consumption and will be affected. You heard me I mentioned earlier the 35% decrease in traffic volume on the state facilities. There are some estimates that when you add in the local streets, the local trips, that number will be higher than a 35% drop in volume. So cash balances for us, fortunately, are healthy, and the impact to capacity will be long-term, not necessarily short-term. The administration and the Department of Finance will release the official estimates of the impact to us on this crisis with the May revise that we should expect anytime soon. As we enter the month of May, we will get a sense of what that impact will be on us. We don't know yet. There's a lot of rumors floating around about what it will mean to us as a department on projects and staffing, but I can assure you, as of now, we don't know any specifics. We don't know those numbers. And one of the things that is a potential upside for us in the middle of all of this, I think, as we all know, is the fact that there's a federal stimulus that there's been a lot of discussion about that is potentially pending. Nothing has passed as it relates to an infrastructure stimulus, but it's something that I think the administration in Washington is aware that, and members of Congress are aware that this is something that likely needs to happen to continue to boost the country and the economy after such a troubling 2.5 or 3 months. So that is in a nutshell. If you move to the next slide, that is in a nutshell is part of what we have been going through at Caltrans. There are many things that have been pushed back, like the SB 743 implementation. For example, we had a July 1 deadline to implement SB 743. It's been pushed back to September 15th as far as the implementation of it goes. But for the most part, a lot of our activities within the department continue to move forward during such a very, very challenging period for all of us. But we're finding a way to get through it. Again, thank you to the CTC, to the staff, Director Weiss, and mission members for plugging Caltrans into this opportunity to share what we've been working on over the last couple of months. Chairman?
Thank you, Director Ogmashakin. Commissioner Inman has a question for you.
Hey, Tubbs, great to hear your voice, and thank you for your steady hand and your leadership and your very comprehensive report. A couple of quick questions. Mitch and I had a telephone conference with a lot of our construction partners in the South, and they had mentioned having some hiccups with utility partners and perhaps where they were working next to our Class 1 railroads getting the flagman out. Are you experiencing any of those issues?
No, that's a good question, Commissioner. No, those issues haven't necessarily been brought to my attention. Our chief engineer and the construction team and staff may be aware specifically of those things, but of an issue like that with utility partners, but hasn't been brought to my attention. If there's some sort of lingering issues there, if there's something that I can do, Commissioner, on this, if it's still going on, please let me know. And thank you to you and Mitch for having those conversations with our partners, construction partners in the South.
Okay, well, we were just offering if we're happy to lean in as well. So if they're aware of any. And then my last question was the Waters of the State implementation is set for May 28th, and you all were working on your MOU. Has that been delayed?
That's another good question. I recently had a briefing on that, Commissioner. To my knowledge, we were still moving forward on that effort on the MOU because that MOU really fits in well to AB 1280 or AB 1282 and our efforts to expedite projects. Yeah. And the MOU, I think, will be a big part of us being able to work with our partners across the state on our water resources, and to be able to get the permits that we need to move projects forward. So, to my knowledge, that effort is moving forward, but I will double check to see that whether or not it ended up on a list of things that will be pushed back due to the pandemic.
Okay, appreciate just open lines of communication. And then just my final thought on any federal stimulus bill. I would encourage us to figure out how to use existing programs, because it's been my experience when we try to create a new program, it takes us forever and a day to actually get the money out the door. So to the extent we can all lean in and help federal stimulus dollars come our way, I think we can figure out a way to put them through whatever lanes we already have established. Will get to work faster. But thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I agree with you on that note about using existing programs. I think that will be our approach if there is a stimulus, because we'll need to get things moving pretty fast here. So I agree with you on that note. Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. I have not been notified of any other questions or comments on this item, so we will close this item and move to tab 10, a rural counties update on COVID-19 impacts. Woodrow Deloria from the El Dorado Transportation Commission will give the presentation. Go ahead, Woodrow.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chair Von Knonenberg, staff members. This is Woodrow Deloria of the Rural Counties Task Force and El Dorado County Transportation Commission. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, first and foremost, on behalf of the 26 rural counties, we all wish the commission and all the staff well, and hope you're very healthy, staying safe, and trying to find peace and joy in every day that we're dealing with this pandemic. CTC staff has been very, very helpful to all of our rural partners throughout the crisis, and for that, we're very grateful. Before I jump into some of the challenges that the rural counties are facing due to COVID-19, I wanted to share that the rural counties are faring well. To date, many of the rural counties have seen slow or low transmission or infection rates. For example, in Butte County, I think yesterday the most current number was 7 cases per 100,000 population. And here in El Dorado County, we've only had 23 cases per 100,000 population. And one of those was one of the commissioners here at EDCTC, but he's doing fine and he's recovering quite well. So in fact, many of our rural partners have expressed to me that they feel fortunate to live where they do here in our rural region. Vast open space and limited population densities. And we're very sympathetic to our urban partners and neighbors who are living in much more heavily populated areas. And we wish them all well and hope that we have them recreating in our backyards here as soon as it's safe to do so. That said, many of the rural counties are facing significant challenges. Most rural agency staff wear many hats, and now I guess masks and gloves as well, but they operate on limited resources. Add to this the pandemic and further reduced staffing, and we're really challenged with meeting and keeping up with program timelines and project delivery. Broadband internet access is very limited in many of our most rural counties. In some cases, the percentage of broadband coverage is in single digits or low teens, and this obviously challenges the ability to work from home or remotely in those communities. Of course, the biggest concern that we all have, aside from the health and wellness of our residents, is the decline in transportation funding related to sales tax and gas tax revenue, which really supports the majority of our rural counties and cities' transportation needs. On the gas tax side, the hit to the gas tax revenue will substantially impact our local road maintenance capabilities and daily operation. And we've heard that that's a major concern, as it is across the state with our rural agency public works departments and departments of transportation. For the sales tax and transient occupancy tax, many of our rural economies are largely supported by recreation and tourism, and the transient occupancy tax is a big revenue generator. It's flexible for our small jurisdictions who really rely on sales tax and that transient occupancy tax to fund their services with very small reserves to withstand long-term impacts. A hit to these sources of funding is really going to have a long-lasting impact to their budget, including staffing and service levels. And as others have mentioned today, the Transportation Development Act fund allocations are also a major concern. Many rural transit operators rely on the local transportation fund and state transit assistance revenues to provide those critical lifeline services in rural regions. The foreseeable decline in these revenues will mean substantial impacts to services, as there are really no other funds to supplement that loss. And in fact, many rural transit agencies have suspended or made cuts to service or gone to a fare-free service, which will impact their fare box recovery ratios and ultimately their future eligibility for those TDA funds. Another issue facing our rural agencies is, as was mentioned by Commissioner Liu this morning, is the maintenance of effort requirements for both local sales tax measures and the local streets and roads funding, which in many cases will not be met as our communities continue to focus on other more pressing needs. On the project delivery side of things, rural agencies are facing several challenges. First of all, there have been a number of conversations regarding the upcoming deadline for implementation of SB 743. While many rural agencies have begun the process to set thresholds and methodologies to comply with SB 743, many will certainly not be able to make the July deadline, but potentially not even the September 15th deadline that Director Omashakin just mentioned, because the meetings have been canceled or postponed and staff have been furloughed, put on a part-time status or on leave. Cash flow is always a challenge for project delivery in rural counties, which all rely on state and federal sources to complete large construction projects, many of which are done through a reimbursement process. This reimbursement process, at no fault of any one agency, will likely be impacted simply due to the nature of the current workforce and the ability to process documentation quickly. One final challenge facing many rural agencies is the reliable and timely access to forms and documents and guidance in working with our local Caltrans district partners. This is due to several factors ranging from the access to broadband that I mentioned, staff being redirected to higher priorities, to changes in communications with staff now working remotely and or part-time, and with a strong desire by the rural counties to keep projects moving forward to both maintain and stimulate the economy. Rural counties are concerned that the limited or delayed access to this information may challenge their ability to continue to deliver projects on time and within the guidelines of the various funding programs. Now, I never like to propose challenges or problems without also proposing some opportunities or solutions to those challenges. So I'll conclude with a kind of a summary of what our rural partners are hoping to see moving forward. First of all, you've already done a great service to our rural partners in taking the policy actions that you have today, commissioners, so thank you for that. providing that flexibility and understanding with the local streets and roads reporting and grant deadline extensions. Really, these changes will ultimately help many rural agencies with their staffing and workload challenges as we are facing today, and we'll likely be facing these for some time to come now. We'd like to ask that you hold on to this understanding and flexibility as we move forward and continue to work closely with our rural partners, as it's likely that we have yet to really understand or realize many of the project delivery or funding challenges that our rural counties will be facing in the months to come. And honestly, the flexibility and understanding that you've shown today in those policy actions is exactly what we'll need to not only keep projects moving, but to get our economies back on track. So again, thank you for that. Now, regarding the decline in revenue, rural counties would ask that the CTC and Caltrans, as well as our urban neighbors, support and advocate alongside us as we seek out long-lasting federal stimulus funding and reauthorization of the FAST Act to really ensure that the rural transportation system isn't left behind. When considering how to help with the maintenance of effort challenges, many agencies would really appreciate a temporary grace period or new time frame from which to measure that MOE for small rural agencies. And this really applies to both the local streets and roads program, but also the legislative requirements of the local sales tax measures. And with project delivery and implementation of SB 743, it sounds like the governor's office, Caltrans, and OPR and other agencies have already extended that deadline to September. The rural agencies are very supportive of that, but would also ask for consideration of perhaps something a little bit longer than that, because it's really critical to keep those land use and transportation projects moving forward during both the economic and the health crisis that we're facing. Concerning the cash flow for small rural agencies, any assistance to expedite the invoicing process or to enhance that process would be greatly appreciated. And I'd be happy to reach out, set up a virtual meeting with RCTF members, CTC staff, and Caltrans to identify issues and opportunities to make those improvements happen. Again, the amended SB1 grant program schedules are very much appreciated by the RCTF members and will help many of the small rural agencies get caught up on their respective workloads and still have, present them an opportunity to secure those much needed funds. So thanks for that consideration. Finally, while all of the rural counties are very concerned about the loss of revenue and impacts to our communities, they all wanted me to express to you all that we're very thankful to all of our urban neighbors who followed the stay-at-home orders and not jeopardize the health and wellness of our small rural communities who don't have the healthcare systems and capacity to support a large influx of folks. But we all invite you to, as soon as safely possible, join us throughout rural California, because we assure you it's still as beautiful and breathtaking as ever. The air and water are cleaner and clearer. The wildflowers are certainly bountiful, and the wildlife is undisturbed. So, in fact, one of the positive things we're seeing in our rural regions is that even with the rather short decrease in traffic and tourism activity and general commerce, we're seeing a real and significant improvement in the conditions of the natural environment, which really proves that all of our collective efforts to reduce VMT and GHG are and will continue to make a difference. So on behalf of the RCTF, I wish you all well and be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Woodrow. At this point, I will just note, Mitch, he had quite a tick list of issues he wanted to go over. Can we commit to him that we'll set up a conference call on those? Okay, Mitch is nodding yes. So Woodrow, Director Weiss and you need to get together and set up a conference call, because I think we can work through that list of items that you had. Are there any questions from? Okay. Are there any questions from the public at this time? No. Are there any questions from commissioners for Woodrow at this time? Seeing none, Woodrow, thank you very much for your presentation. Now we'll move to tab 11. And in tab 11, we're going to discuss, receive information on the COVID impacts on transit. And we're going to start with Michael Pimentel from the California Transit Association. Michael, the floor is yours.
Go ahead, Michael. Commissioners and staff, I'm Michael Pimentel, Deputy Executive Director of the California Transit Association. I'd like to begin my comments this morning by thanking you for the invitation to speak on the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on California's transit agencies. And I also would like to thank several of the previous speakers, Director Omashakin and Therese McMillan, as they and their staff have been invaluable partners in addressing the crisis every day. If you've been tracking the headlines, you no doubt know that the information I'm about to share with you is, well, a bit unsettling. And if left unaddressed, will undercut the steady progress our state has made for decarbonizing the transportation sector and building a more robust and accessible public transit network. So to cut right to it, ridership is down at most transit agencies in the state by 70 to 90%. And we suspect that much of this ridership loss is a result of Californians responding, I'll note, responsibly to the state shelter-in-place order. But it may also stem from public skepticism about the safety of riding transit during the pandemic. The highest ridership losses are being experienced by transit and rail agencies that disproportionately serve commuters, like BART, Caltrans, and as the director noted, the state-supported intercity passenger rail lines. And this makes intuitive sense. These riders, or the riders of these systems, are generally higher income, they have access to a car, or have jobs that lend themselves well to remote working. With this loss in ridership, transit agencies are also experiencing steep declines in fare box revenue, which are felt disparately between individual transit agencies. As you may know, most agencies operating in urban areas recover about 20% of their operating costs from passenger fares. But at large agencies like BART and Caltrain, fares comprise upwards of 60% of their operating budgets. When their fare revenues plummet, as they have, their ability to provide even base levels of service is seriously threatened. What's more, transit agencies are facing new operational costs for the measures they are taking to keep their vehicles and facilities clean and the traveling public and their workforce safe. Our early estimates, based on still incomplete data, show that transit agencies will face upwards of $2 billion in lost fare revenue and new operational expenses alone over the next calendar year. This is a crisis in the truest sense. Now, fortunately, through the leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Senators Feinstein, Harris, and Governor Gavin Newsom, the industry's collective advocacy, the nation's transit agencies were able to secure $25 billion in the Federal Coronavirus Aid, Recovery, and Economic Security Act, otherwise known as the CARES Act. California's share of that funding is roughly $3.74 billion, split about 97 to 3% between urbanized and non-urban areas. The passage of the CARES Act was a godsend for California transit agencies that helped them avoid the worst cuts, the cuts that were on the horizon that would have dealt devastating blows to regional economies, as well as possibly the state's economy. Very critically, this funding has allowed transit agencies to keep lines open for essential workers, the healthcare professionals, the grocery store clerks, many of whom are themselves transit dependent. But make no mistake, the CARES Act is a short-term funding solution that is unlikely to cover the revenue shortfalls associated with the deferred but expected decline in sales tax revenues, what we refer to internally as the pandemic's second wave of impacts on transit agencies. And it will not cover the impact of a prolonged economic recovery. Our transit agency members are deeply concerned about what this second wave of impacts will mean for their operations, as local and state sales taxes contribute approximately $4 billion annually to public transit capital projects and operations. This includes local transportation fund revenues from the state's Transportation Development Act, as well as local sales taxes, or rather local sales tax revenue that's generated by local option sales taxes. And when that wave hits, it will be imperative that the state and federal governments support transit agencies further with additional funds that keep transit agencies running. To track the timing of that wave, we've partnered with Caltrans and CalAct on a new consolidated survey mechanism that requests information from transit agencies on a weekly basis. Now, separate from the impacts on ridership and revenue losses, the pandemic has also underscored the need to streamline certain state government processes, create flexibility in funding programs, and to temporarily postpone certain regulatory milestones so that transit agencies that are already stretched thin can direct their limited funding and staff capacities to advancing public health while they maintain essential service. Working with our members, we have identified 13 distinct statutory and regulatory relief measures aimed at reducing administrative costs and burden. These measures, which were shared with Governor Newsom and his administration, legislative leadership, as well as CTC staff, would generally temporarily eliminate counterproductive financial penalties for noncompliance with various transit funding efficiency measures, create more flexibility in the use of existing transit funding, and temporarily postpone the timelines for various enforcement actions, regulatory milestones, and the use of funding that would otherwise shift agency resources away from their core mission during the crisis. One measure we had contemplated as part of this process was to request an extension of the application deadlines for local partnership and solutions for congested corridors programs. And luckily, with the prescience of CTC staff, that request was unnecessary. Finally, I'd like to call out that my association has been laser focused on developing educational resources to support California transit agencies during the crisis. We have stood up a new resources page on our website that highlights all relevant guidance from state and federal public health sources, and which features a running tracker of the impacts of the crisis on transit agencies statewide. And I mention this because these resources are publicly facing and available to all stakeholders, including the CTC, for their review. We've created also several new communication channels for our members and key stakeholders, which call attention to new industry trends, safety protocols, and industry research. Alongside CalAct, we will soon be co-hosting weekly webinars dedicated to addressing the very practical questions our two associations receive from our members daily. And as part of this effort, my association is also beginning to explore alongside our members, regional and federal partners, what transit will look like on the other side of the crisis. At the national level, the industry's efforts will be spearheaded by the American Public Transportation Association through a newly formed Mobility, Recovery, and Restoration Task Force, chaired by Phil Washington, CEO of LA Metro. My association intends to contribute to this effort by evaluating operational improvements, safety protocols, and policy recommendations that support the needs of California transit agencies and to support them to regain transit riders. By the same token, we will pursue the development of state-level strategies for helping our local transit agencies rebound, which we expect will be heavily informed by the efforts of regional partners like MTC. Now, with that, I'd like to thank you again for reaching out to hear from the California Transit Association on the impacts of the pandemic on California's transit agencies. I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any questions from the commission for Michael? Are there any questions from the public for Michael?
Yes, we do have public at this time. I see hand raises from Kay Selby, Monica Mallon, followed by Joko Borja. Kay, you are now unmuted and free to speak.
Hi there, this is Thea Selby from the San Francisco Transit Riders here in San Francisco. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
We can.
Wonderful. First of all, I want to thank Josh Stark of Transform for suggesting that transit riders organizations be a part of this really important agenda. I am thrilled to be speaking to you, and I thank you. I've learned a lot in the process of simply listening to your meeting. I also want to thank Mitch Weiss for reaching out to me and to sort of giving me the lay of the land yesterday. I want to say a couple of things. We in San Francisco are one of the San Francisco, the SFMTA is one of the agencies that's been really hard hit. I think it's 94 to 96% loss in terms of ridership. And of course, we are a very dense city, and so we do depend on transportation, public transportation. And unlike a lot of other cities, it hasn't been going down. It hasn't been going up as fast as we'd like, but it hasn't been going down in San Francisco as it has in other places, partially because of a strong advocacy, and partially because of the density of the city. And now I think we have a fantastic also person who's leading our organization. So just a couple of things I want to say from the San Francisco Transit Riders perspective. We are, just so you know who we are, a current and future riders who are united for excellent, affordable, and growing transit. And we have the bizarre job now. The executive director of our organization is telling people to stay off transit. And I have to say, as you know, this is one of the weirdest times for me. I've been involved in this organization since its inception 10 years ago, that we have a transit rider advocacy organization urging people to stay off transit. So first of all, that is something that, you know, I think you all need to know, that there are people out there who who would normally really be advocating for people to be on transit, who are asking people, unless you're an essential worker, to stay off. The second thing is, as part of the transit riders, we're part of a coalition called Voices for Public Transportation, which is a larger Bay Area coalition that's made up of organized labor and different community-based organizations. And we came together, we've been working since COVID to come together and try and get transit funding, because we realized that the last time we had a crisis and some sort of emergency funding, that transit was largely overlooked. And we wanted to make sure that we did everything we could to make sure that, among other things, operators got what they needed, agencies got what they needed, because we know that, yes, essential workers do ride public transportation. And I read today that there are some 2.8 million essential workers who are using public transportation right now to get around. So the first is, we're not allowed on transit, most of us right now, which is causing us to either get into our cars or to walk or to bike. The second is the issue of masks, which I don't think I can overstate here. Latifah Simon, who is a BART board commissioner, called 20 manufacturers to try and get enough masks, not only, first of all, for operators, but you're not supposed to ride transit if you don't have a mask. And there actually, I have ridden transit several times, probably more times than most, even though I work at home, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on. And I will say, in San Francisco, in general, people are wearing masks. The operators, we started, as a lot of other places did, not allowing the operators to be anywhere in front of the seats for the disabled and seniors. So we're hopeful that and we actually did a kind of a fundraiser, the San Francisco Transit Riders, to raise money to get more masks for the operators, because there was definitely a concern that they were not getting the PPP and masks that they needed. But there's an important point here, is you can't ask people to have a mask necessarily if they can't get a mask. And that is certainly an issue right now. And I know there's been talk about handing out masks. And in fact, we did some of this at 24th and Mission to riders as well as to operators if they should need them, because you don't want riders on the bus without a mask. And yet there doesn't appear to be any concerted effort to make sure that riders or potential riders are able to access masks. So I will put that out there. Other than that, I'm really looking forward and hoping that we can come out, and that the recovery can certainly include transit riders, in terms of when you're looking to do the recovery, that you make sure that you have transit riders as part of your people that you talk to, because we are many. In San Francisco alone, there are normally there are 750,000 rides a day, which is upwards of 350,000 people who are riding transit. So we really appreciate you asking us to this meeting here, and we hope we can continue to provide some input. Thank you.
Thank you. Justin, who is our next speaker to make comment or question?
Monica, you are now unmuted and free to speak.
Monica? Looks like Monica's not with us at the moment. Let's move to the next speaker, Justin.
All right, we will move on to the next speaker, which is Joe Phil. Joe Phil, you're now unmuted and free to speak.
Morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Joe Phil.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners, and hardworking CTC staff. Joe Phil here, one of your biggest fans, representing Sacramento Regional Transit. First of all, kudos to Chair PBK and Director Weiss. Y'all are keeping the CCC webcast fashionable and safe as well, so a big fan. Thank you. As Mr. Pimentel and CTA folks have mentioned in multiple conversations, as well as the budget hearing earlier this week in the legislature, transit agencies, especially SACRT, has become much more than a transit agency during the pandemic. We've actually thrived as a health and social service partner. Yes, there are ridership drops. We've emphasized that we're transporting essential service personnel, but SACRT, we're really glad to see that our system is slowly increasing services again. We realize how much folks have been using the system during the pandemic, but also to meet the social distancing needs. Positive enough, though, to point out is that our microtransit on-demand system is actually still popular, and we have not seen great decreases on that, and people are still using microtransit services and on-demand transit services, especially for those that are at risk for having to visit the doctors, because they feel that they are able to have a better social distancing needs and that they feel safer in those protocols. Just a few updates with what SACRT is doing. As you've heard from Director Kim and Secretary Kim and Director Strachan, and as well as Governor Newsom, transit agencies have expanded services to support food delivery systems for seniors and food banks. We've enabled transport and prioritization for homeless and at-risk populations. And we've even partnered with the state and private sectors on expanding internet connectivity to help distance learning, and have adapted our day-to-day operations to support different community needs. You may have heard from the media that we will be launching, and very excited to launch, a pilot project next week with many of the private sectors to equip our buses with Wi-Fi connectivity and make them mobile hotspots. We call them Wi-Fi on wheels, or WOW. We're going to be parking these vehicles in certain locations to help with the digital divide and really encourage the folks to not only follow through social distancing and social learning, but really enable these communities who now have Chromebooks and have students at home to have Wi-Fi connectivity. And we do this in partnership with the city of Sacramento to no cost taxpayer dollars, because private sectors are also investing their technologies on these. But moving forward, we'd really respectfully ask the commissioners and the state to consider government's role in supporting transit agencies when the future revenue shortfalls do manifest. The importance of public transit and moving essential workers definitely is paramount to the recovery of California, and public transit plays an integral part in revitalizing the state's economy. Public transit doesn't just move people, it provides jobs to those that work in transit positions and transit agencies such as regional transit. We provide local job growth, sales tax for the state of California, and we pay our own fair share through various capital and operational projects. We continue to be major employers for the capital region, and we want to be a catalyst for job growth, economic investment, and stability for our communities, and in the long term, really pursue the goals of Governor Newsom's N1919. And so for that, we respectfully urge your consideration of the policy recommendations that CTA have shared, and would look forward to working with you and your staff to continue the conversations and really identify how best we can move forward and deliver projects and really see the benefits of these infrastructure investments to not only the region, but the state of California. Grateful for the time. Thank you so much, Chair PBK and Director Rice. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, Joe Phil. At this point, we're going to go to Jacqueline Montgomery from the California Association for Coordinated Transportation. And then if there's other comments or questions on this item, we can come back to that. So, Jacqueline?
Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank the commissioners, Director Weiss, and the commission staff for the invitation to speak at the meeting today. If you go to the second slide. I wanted to let you know that the presentation may be a little bit duplicate of what Michael Pimentel from the California Transit Association talked about today, and he did a really good job of an overview. I'm going to focus on the impact to rural agencies in California, since the California Transit Association for Coordinated Transportation actually focuses a lot on the rural and the medium-sized agencies. We also work with large agencies, but we specialize in the small to medium agencies. So the stats that I have up are based on the results of a survey from approximately 75 rural agencies. Those are 5311 funded agencies, and the data is prior to April 1st. As Michael mentioned, CALAC, Caltrans, and the California Transit Association completed a joint survey tool that is being updated by agencies, so we'll have better data soon, hopefully. I want to thank Kyle Gradinger and his team for working with the associations to put the survey together. And I really appreciate their efforts on this. So we're looking forward to getting more data to you in the future on this. Right now, almost 90% of our rural agencies are operating on a reduced schedule on Saturday or Sunday schedules. We only have about a 60% to cut to intercity bus routes. And those are the longer bus services that go, for example, one of them goes from City of Arcata to Klamath Falls. And I think the reason mainly that they're having still a somewhat decent ridership is because they're taking people to essential doctor's appointments and to hospitals in those areas. 5 very rural agencies have discontinued their service as of now, and 20 5310 nonprofit programs for the elderly and disabled have suspended their services until further notice. Next slide. Excuse me just a minute. I can move my slides. So latest anecdotal information is that most agencies have moved to free fares for all passengers to help protect the drivers and the riders, so the loss is 100% loss of fare box revenue. The only agencies that I know that are still charging fares to the public are private intercity bus services like Greyhound and the intercity bus routes such as Red Coast Transit Authority. Greyhound is losing money on all their routes and their needs are huge also, and we've been working with them on trying to work out how they're going to be able to maintain their routes and connect to our larger intercity bus network in the state of California. We have no idea how long the effects of COVID-19 will have on future sales tax revenue and fare box recovery, as we heard earlier today. It could be several years before some of these funding sources are back to our 20 and 2019 levels, and we're hoping that you guys will work with us as partners to get the ridership back up. Next slide. The average of layoffs per agency, and this is for the rural agencies based on the 75 rural agencies, is about 10 employees per agency. I know that seems small, but some of our agencies may only have 5 or 6 staff. Many agencies have placed administrative staff on paid leave or unpaid leave. Drivers, maintenance staff are having a reduction in hours, and many are on part-time employment. However, we're very grateful for the CARES Act money. This will allow agencies to reemploy staff to full-time hours and start bringing back some of the services that we desperately need. I want to thank Kyle Gradinger, Wendy King at DRMT for all their work in getting the money out to our agencies. It's been desperate, and they're working very hard to get that money out quickly so that drivers and staff can start reinstating services. Many of the drivers and staff are doing other duties, as we've heard before, such as cleaning vehicle equipment and calling ADA riders for wellness checks. Many of our rural agencies do not have access to purchasing PPEs and disinfectant cleaners and hand sanitizers and staff. We're currently working with the Federal Transit Administration and the Office of Emergency Services to get masks for our agencies. In the meantime, our association placed an initial order of 240,000 masks and over 25,000 bottles of hand sanitizer that we are just now allocating and distributing to our members over 125 agencies. We did this because a lot of the small agencies did not have the ability to buy or did not need bulk mass purchases. So we bought the bulk of the mass and distributing. I think the biggest change, one of the biggest changes to the rural operators is the risk to the drivers. California drivers, as you know, some have tested positive to COVID-19, and at least one driver in California has died from the virus. It is impossible for drivers to provide for social distancing when assisting ADA passengers and seniors on the vehicles and while securing mobility devices. However, I think our drivers are doing a fantastic job in the agencies. They're handing out masks to our riders and asking them to put their mask on prior to boarding the vehicle and securing their wheelchair. And the one good thing, I guess, coming out of this, because of the decline in ridership, it is allowing single riders on paratransit vehicles, so it does allow for social distancing. Next slide. As I mentioned before, a lot of the operators, in fact, drivers, we're working with our agencies right now to change their operating contracts so that they can add language so that their drivers can currently do other duties and be paid for that. So they can be paid for cleaning and disinfecting vehicles. Maintenance staff can be changed for creating barriers between drivers and riders. And I think our agencies have gotten very creative
in adding barriers such as a shower curtain around the driver to protect them from any coughs or anything coming, any virus coming towards them. They remove seats behind the drivers. They're doing everything they can to create social distancing for the riders and making the riders feel safe. And as I mentioned before, they're passing out masks for some paratransit riders. However, we don't have enough masks for them to do that for every rider as yet, but it's something we're working on. As the lady from the union, Riders Union talked about earlier, there's huge impacts to our customers. They have very limited transportation services at this time. There's a decrease in paratransit services. However, I want to add that a lot of agencies are working very hard to maintain and provide any paratransit service that is requested. However, they are spending a lot of time on messaging regarding essential trips, that can they stay home in place of taking transit? Is there another service that can be provided? As mentioned from the speaker from Sacramento Regional Transit, a lot of our agencies, especially rural agencies, are working on delivery of meals, groceries, prescriptions, or other things so that our residents can shelter in place instead of riding the bus to the grocery store. One of the last things that I think both associations are working on currently, 5310 agencies that do a lot of service and disabled and senior riders, they are not able to deliver meals due to the way the federal regulations have been set up, so we're advocating for a change to that. The flexibility was added under the CARES Act for the 5311 and 5307 operators, but not to the 5310 operators at this time. But it is something we are working on so that those operators can help our riders and our customers. Last thing I want to talk about is some of the transit needs during the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, we've all talked about this earlier today. We need funding to replace future revenue losses. Michael alluded to it, both associations, the California Transit Association leading the way and CALAC supporting them on regulatory relief from state regulations such as fare box ratio requirements, innovative clean transit regulations, Prop 1B, and other programs that are out there. LT-TOP, we want flexibility with the LT-TOP program. We've submitted a letter to FTA, and some of the things that have been approved already is relief from Title 6 regulations, ADA, and a postponement of the federal safety plans to the end of the year. So we're pleased that FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, has been working closely with the transit agencies in providing relief. It's going to be a huge challenge. It's been mentioned by all the speakers today, regaining customer trust, and we'll be focusing on messaging to our customers about why transit is safe, everything we're doing to keep transit safe and keep the riders safe. One of the things that we're very happy that CARES Act will help us to rehire drivers and reestablish services that were cut so that riders can again depend on transit and regaining and increasing ridership. I also want to add that we are doing everything we can to work with the California Transit Association, Caltrans, and our partners to provide education and training to our operators. We also have a COVID-19 resource page on our website that we'd like to invite anyone to look at. We have a forum page that members can share resources and ask questions of their other partners so that we can get that information out to them. And as Michael alluded to earlier, we are partnering together to do weekly transit talks on very important topics for our operators to help them do the important jobs that they do. And as I said before, I know that presentation is more anecdotal, and we're working on getting more accurate data to you in the future on what's going on with the transit agencies. And I really appreciate the time today and the support that you've all shown for transit in the state of California. And with that, I'll entertain any questions, and thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Commissioner Liu, you had a comment or a question?
Yes, thank you. Jacqueline, thank you for that very thorough presentation. It was great. You covered a lot of bases, and I agree with a vast majority of it. I did see on that second to last slide that there was an item about seeking relief from the innovative clean transit regulation you didn't mention in your actual presentation. And let me preface what I'm going to say by saying that I'm a huge transit advocate. I use public transit. I use the Silver Line to get to and from work when I go to the office, and I'm, currently wondering how I'm going to do that safely when I start going back to the office again. I'm also, however, dedicated to improving air quality and preventing climate change. So the innovative clean transit regulation is near and dear to me. I'm not sure what kind of relief you're seeking from this regulation, but there is an exemption built into it for financial hardship. And if you're not familiar with it, I would recommend that you take a look at Title 13 of the California Code of Regulations, Section 2023.4 C5. The relief that you need, I think, is already built into the regulation. And also, the Air Resources Board did do a supplemental economic impact assessment that considered different cases, looking at the environment, in economic impacts on the transit agencies by complying with the regulation. They looked at 6 different cases, and all but one of those complying with the regulation actually saved money. And the one that it didn't, which was one in which they compared using battery electric buses versus the CNG bus in 2029, the difference was only $8,444 over a 14-year period. So it seems to me that, unless ARB was wrong, this regulation can actually save money. And I'm sure that no one needs relief from a regulation that'll save money. So I just want to bring that up. Nothing, ill intent about it. It's just that I do think that there is a financial hardship provision within the regulation that transit agencies should be looking at and considering.
Thank you for your comments. And yes, we're mainly looking at maybe like just a postponement or a little bit of a delay. I'm aware of the hardship caused, but I think the biggest thing, and we are working at, Michael and I have planned actually a webinar with the HARB and Yatin Chow to talk about possibly a relief effort that they're doing to delay or postpone, as long as people have been working on their plan, that they're going to look at that individually. So I know Michael is working on a template on that, and we'll be presenting that to our agency. So it's not that we don't want to do that. We definitely do. In fact, our agency does a procurement on behalf of the small operators, and we're currently looking at procuring electric vehicles on behalf of our operators. So we definitely want to support them in these efforts. I think the biggest challenge that we see from our rural operators is the ones that have to invest in infrastructure and changing their whole yard. I know, like in Humboldt County or Yuba Sutter, have talked about how they're going to have to get new property and build a new facility in order to have the infrastructure for these vehicles. So I'm just concerned mainly about having enough resources to do these, cover the infrastructure costs in the short term. Thanks.
Thank you. Love to talk about it offline anytime.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Justin, do we have any other comments?
Yes, we do have public comment. Monica Mallon, followed by Veronica Lazama. Monica, you are now unmuted and free to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name is Monica Mallon. I live in Santa Clara County, and I'm a student at San Jose State, and I've been riding transit for my entire life, and I don't own a car. Because of this, I'm very concerned about the impact that the drop in sales tax and gas tax revenue is going to have on riders like myself throughout the state, especially as we're coming out of shelter in place, and we're going to be needing to get to work in other places. The operations budget for one of the transit agencies in my county, for example, VTA, is 75% funded through county and state sales tax, and our county currently estimates that sales tax is down by 50%. So even with the CARES Act funding, which is going to help a lot, significant cuts to local bus and light rail service will most likely be made, which will bring our service levels back to where they were 30 years ago. And I assume that similar things are happening throughout the state as well. So I really want to urge you all to consider operations as we're coming out of this crisis, because it's really one of the most important things for riders. If we don't have funding for operations, it doesn't matter if we're getting new buses or new train cars, because the service just won't be able to come back from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
We no longer have Veronica, but we do have Julia Randolph ready to make a comment. Julia, you are now unmuted and free to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. We would like to Also agree with the high priority we should be placing on transit operations. While transit is experiencing a necessary yet significant drop in ridership and revenues due to COVID-19, we know that transit operators and essential workers who rely solely on transit to get to and from work need a dependable transit system. Essential workers cannot afford cuts to the routes that will cause them to miss work because they don't have transportation. Neither should they be forced to use unsafe systems because agencies lack the funds or guidance to institute adequate safety measures for the public and for drivers. We need greater efforts to rapidly shift transportation dollars towards healthier ends that offer greater mobility options, active transportation, and zero emission infrastructure, and that support transit systems now. We have deep concerns around administrative and or regulatory relief measures for transit. While we understand transit agencies are dealing with immediate challenges around declining ridership and fares, and they need necessary support and flexibility, we also want to make sure administrative or regulatory relief measures will not slow down California's ability to tackle air pollution and climate change. We need to carefully balance administrative and regulatory relief efforts for transit with the urgent need to address climate change and air pollution. We need to further healthier transportation choices that reduce vehicle miles traveled and associated traffic pollution. Thank you for your hard work to address the current crisis we are facing.
Thank you, Julia, for your comment. Jacqueline or Michael, is there any other further comments you need to make to wrap this up?
No, I just want to thank you again for your presentation today and all the support in public transit in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Oh, we have one more comment.
Yes, we have one more written comment from Naila Pope Hardin with Climate Plan. Climate Plan and 15 other partner organizations send a letter to Speaker Render urging that there be flexibility in all funding that can legally be reappropriated to operating expenses related to COVID. This includes programs like the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program and a temporary change in low carbon transit operating program. As Commissioner Norton stated earlier, there are programs already in place that can be utilized to meet the needs of the moment. To quote Director Omashaka, we need all hands on deck approach. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. At this point, we're going to move to tab 12, which will be discussing the COVID-19 impacts on goods movements. We'll begin with Chris Shimoda from the California Trucking Association. Chris?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the full commission for the invitation to present to you today. Next slide, please. Well, it's been a very interesting 6 weeks, to say the least. The trucking industry has been hard at work, designated as an essential critical infrastructure sector by the Department of Homeland Security and an essential sector under the governor's stay-at-home order. The photo on the slide is of CTA's 2020 member president, Greg Dubuque, from Liberty Line Haul West, who, in addition to being both the president of the Trucking Association this year, as well as his company, has been driving trucks alongside his fellow 3.5 million professional truckers during the pandemic. COVID-19 has increased demands for essential goods such as shelf-stable food, toilet paper, paper towels, and hand sanitizer. The industry has also played a role in the transportation of critical medical supplies, PPE, and COVID-19 tests. Alternatively, other areas of the economy have come to a sudden halt, and truckers servicing areas of the economy such as restaurants, large events, and other businesses subject to stay-at-home orders have had to make on-the-fly changes to their business models to stay afloat. CTA has appreciated its working relationship with CalSTA, Caltrans, the DMV, GoBiz, and CalOES during this difficult time, and we'd just like to give a special thanks to Secretary Kim for his leadership. Both he and his team have been fantastic over the past month. Upon the issuance of the stay-at-home order on March 19th, we've had near daily interactions with our counterparts at the agencies, and have put in place numerous flexibilities needed to keep truckers licensed, keep trucks registered, and provide temporary food and parking options. We've been pleased that local implementation of stay-at-home orders and things like slow streets initiatives have recognized the essential nature of trucking and the need for deliveries to be exempt from through traffic closures on local streets and roads. All in all, we are very pleased to report that freight is moving relatively unimpeded during this crisis. And finally, just to note, we've been hard at work connecting our members with PPE and sanitation supply providers, and I think I echo the sentiment of the prior presenters who are, I think all facing similar difficulties in sourcing these materials. And so we look forward to collaborating with the state to forecast future needs as we plan for second waves and future pandemics. Next slide, please. So we have a saying in the trucking industry: if you bought it, a truck brought it. And today's crisis has again highlighted the role truckers play in ensuring essential goods are delivered, even during crises such as a pandemic. And this has not gone unnoticed. The outpouring of support for truckers from the general public has been incredible, and just wanted to highlight some examples of the numerous things out there expressing thanks to truckers. Next slide, please. Now, unfortunately, I don't have all good news here today. Now, while the industry saw an uptick in demand in the initial weeks following the shutdown order due to panic buying, the slowdown in the general economy has really finally caught up to us. The images on your screen reflect number of loads to available trucks to haul them, and these numbers are specific to the flatbed truck sector. And so think about things like raw materials that go into manufacturing, construction equipment, and other large industrial cargo. The most recent data indicates that there is a 4 load to 1 truck ratio, and that is greater than 75% off on a year-over-year basis from 2019, which was already a slow year compared to the year prior. Next slide, please. And similar story throughout other segments of the industry. These figures represent the load to truck ratios in the dry van segment, which is just your traditional 53-foot trailer you see going down the road, as well as the refrigerated sector. And as you can see, no part of the industry is being spared from this falling demand. And, I just highlight the refrigerated demand numbers actually surprised me a bit. Given the run on buying of food products and produce, I think a lot of this reflects that there are trucking companies that are seeing slowdowns in other areas that are entering that refrigerated space for the first time, so increasing demand. Some other figures to give you a picture of what is happening in the industry right now. The analysts who look at this sort of thing anticipate that new Class 8 truck sales, so tractor sales, are anticipated to fall by over 50% this year. And that's just a sentiment of tightening capital budgets in response to what everyone expects to be a prolonged recession. Anecdotally, I can tell you our member president, who I highlighted earlier, indicates that his business is off by approximately 25%. His core business is off by 50%, and they've had to backfill that by getting into areas of business they are not traditionally in. And I think that's fairly common for folks who service areas of the economy which are slow right now. We have been made aware that there are furloughs already occurring throughout the industry. And so in short, while we did have this initial spike in the weeks following the stay-at-home orders, general recessionary conditions driven by the COVID-19 pandemic are already impacting trucking. Next slide. And so thank you again to the CTC for the invitation to speak today. If you have any questions about COVID-19 and trucking, we too have a COVID-19 resource page that you can visit at the link on the screen, and I'm happy to answer any of the Commission's questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think we'll go ahead and hear Rachel Michelin's presentation and then come back around for questions. So Rachel Michelin, if you would take the floor, please.
Thank you. And I want to reiterate and thank you, Chair and Commissioners, for the opportunity to present today regarding how COVID-19 has impacted the retail industry. It's a nice kind of touching on a lot of what Chris mentioned, where we are the end game for many of the goods and services that are sent through the supply chain in California. And we've been impacted both on the side of our member companies who were deemed essential, trying to keep the store shelves stocked, trying to keep the goods in the store that folks were looking for, but then also for our member companies that were deemed non-essential and 6 weeks ago were closed and are having to now look at how we reopen our economy and particularly look at the retail industry in the state. In California, retail represents over 3.6 million jobs with over $2.2 billion to the California economy. And not only that, we're a huge economic driver to local economies. So as we talked about earlier today, some of the impacts of the local budgets and the effect of COVID-19, my member companies and many retailers up and down the state are very anxious to get working again so that we can continue to contribute to those local economies. We really look at transportation and our transportation system in California as a very important partner to retail. And we look forward to working with all of you as we start examining ways to open the economy. We were very happy with some of the remarks that Governor Newsom made yesterday regarding phase 2 or stage 2 of his recovery plan, with first and foremost starting with curbside pickup for all retailers in the state of California. So we're currently working on a very comprehensive plan that we are working with the administration, with local governments, with public health officers across the state on how we can safely and effectively reopen retail so that we can continue to be an economic driver for the state and for our local communities. I really want to say thank you to our partners. We've worked closely with Caltrans, with the Trucking Administration, with other stakeholders, GoBiz, on a lot of our supply chain issues. But it has been challenging, and we're looking to see how things are impacted going forward. Some of our major retailers, some of the big national retailers that are in California have had to look at their supply chain issues. They've had to look at the inventory that are in their stores currently and how they're going to move that inventory in order to make room for inventory that's coming in. Retail is very seasonal, as many of you know, and so we are trying to figure out how we can keep the movement of goods going so that consumers have the things that they're looking for without any hiccups in the supply chain movement. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I'm having many conversations, both within California at the national level, on how the good movement will work once retail is open in the state. But again, we're doing the best we can to make sure that we can provide be a good partner within the supply chain and the transportation movements in California. We do take very seriously our relationships, particularly with local governments and the unique diversity of the state, in that as we look to reopen some of our retail establishments, first and foremost, we want to make sure we do it safely. It is extremely important to retailers that we protect our employees. We're now in the process of making sure that, as many other folks in different industries, on PPE, making sure that we're training our employees on how to safely work in the retail establishment. You'll see changes in floor designs when you walk into a store. You'll see changes in how you interact with employees in a retail establishment. And our first and foremost priority is to ensure the protection of our employees and our consumers. So we're making many changes, and I'm happy probably later this week, early next week, to share with the commission our very detailed proposal on what retail will look like going forward to ensure the safety of our consumers and the future of California. I think with that, I'm open to any questions folks may have regarding retail. I appreciate the opportunity to participate today. Again, we want to be a partner with as many different organizations and groups as we can. We believe that we make an important contribution both to the workforce and to the economy of the state and local governments. And we want to work with everyone in order to ensure that we can continue to move forward and pass the COVID-19 health crisis. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Justin, do we have any questions from the public for Chris and Rachel? All right, thank you very much. We'll now move to tab 13, which is public comment. I will note that the chair has received a letter from the American Lung Association with comments on COVID-19 informational items in the tabs 7 through 12, and I will pass this letter along to staff. Are there any other public comments at this time?
Yes, we do have one public comment at this time.
Great.
Will Barrett, American Lung Association. Good morning, and thank you for holding the important discussion today on the wide-ranging impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've submitted written comments on American Lung Association COVID-19 resources, findings from our recent state-of-the-art report, and the need for continued work in support of sustainable transportation systems to reduce harmful emissions that impact community health and resiliency. Especially in our most vulnerable communities, we are now facing multiple threats to lung health at once, threats that can amplify each other and that demand ongoing responses. I look forward to working with the commissioners and staff to ensure clean, healthy air for all Californians as we come through this challenging time. I hope that everyone remains healthy and safe, and thank you all again for today's detailed discussions.
Thank you, Will. At this time, I do not see any other comments from either the commission or the public. I thank you all for joining us. Oh.
Apologies, we have Julie Randolph with her hand raised.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah. Julie, you are now muted and free to speak.
Great. I also sent my comments in the box, so you could ignore that. Julia Randolph with the Coalition for Clean Air. I would like to start by saying we're deeply concerned by the pay decreasing and lack of protective equipment for our truckers while trucking is up. These drivers are lifelines for Americans. They're transporting our food, medical supplies, clothing, and much more. But as I stated earlier, with the current stay-at-home orders, goods movement is increasing and may remain high even after restrictions are lifted as people try to avoid crowded spaces like stores and restaurants. But freight also has some of the biggest adverse impacts to our environment and air quality. We are also seeing troubling correlations between unhealthy air and higher death rates due to COVID-19, and these impacts are falling disproportionately on communities most impacted by nearby sources of transportation pollution, including our ports, rail yards, freight distribution centers, freeways, and other hotspots of diesel exhaust. We need significant reductions in transportation pollution through advanced technologies and reductions in diesel freight exhaust. Standards to reduce harmful emissions from the freight sector must continue to be developed and implemented to protect our public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. All right, Justin, one last time.
No other public comment at this time.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, thank you all for joining us today. Be safe and be well. This meeting is adjourned.